What will user interfaces be like in 50 years? My guest has an answer to that big question. I'm Tonya Hall for ZDNet, and joining me is John Underkoffler. He is the founder and CEO of Oblong Industries. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Tonya. Thrilled to be here.
We'll talk about Oblong Industries in a moment, but when we do, people may realize they're looking at something very familiar. Tell us briefly about your contribution to the movie Minority Report.
Well, it's not exactly the kind of thing that as a designer and technologist you can plan, but when the opportunity comes along, I highly encourage anyone to grab it. What happened was simply that I'd just been finishing up a kind of embarrassingly long time in school at MIT at the Media Lab, and the movie Minority Report had just gotten greenlit. It was just going into production, and I was invited through the usual series of clerical errors, I assumed, to come out and serve as the science and technology advisor for the film, which was sort of a year-long engagement and meant that I was responsible for knitting together all of the future tech that was seen in the film, but in particular, of course, I had to design the future computer systems. What will UI be like in 50 years was the big question. And the result with Tom Cruise and Neil McDonough and Colin Farrell gesturing in front of a huge transparent screen of pixels is kind of what came out the other end of that design process.
And it certainly has had an impact on everyone that has seen that movie. So that led into you and your business. So what do you do? What is Oblong Industries' mission?
Well, our mission, quite literally, is to build new forms of computing for the future that go beyond what we have today, and that subscribe maybe to a different set of metrics and ethics from how we build computers today. Stuff that thinks more about human beings and the kind of creative impulse, the synthetic impulse, what people really need to do to get work done and to build a future world that we all want to live in. So that's the mission writ large. The particular piece of it that we've kind of chipped off that very large set of ideas right now is around user interface for collaboration. Because historically, computers have been very, very isolating or isolationist or solipsistic. Every computer you've ever used for the last 35 years has a user interface that thinks only about you, or only about me, or only about whoever is using it. So it's like an internal dialogue. It's like you're talking to yourself. But as we know, the best things in the world, in life, in your daily, weekly, yearly existence happen when you're interacting with other people. So we're building the missing half of the computer, a product called Mezzanine that lets people use a lot of pixels all at the same time, very much like Minority Report, to share ideas, to work on ideas, to bring ideas together, and to make decisions faster and better.
So how are people using Mezzanine to interface, to transform workplaces and workflow?
One of the most exciting things for me and for us at Oblong is that there's not a single use vertical for Mezzanine. It's almost anything you can name we're currently serving, whether it's construction or financial services or pharma or education, on and on and on, the entire list, basically. But and the reason that's the case is that everyone needs to collaborate. Every business process, every work process involves more than one person, unless you're a sole proprietorship, presumably. So when people need to get together and do something more complicated than any one person can do alone, that's when Mezzanine comes into play. And what it does is to essentially allow you to take all the stuff that's trapped inside your computer, trapped on your own personal desktop, and get it up side by side, mixed up with everybody else's stuff, where everybody can see it, everyone can understand the whole, which is, of course, a very big sum of parts.
Mezzanine uses proprietary hardware for spatial computing. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I mean, in this day and age, being proprietary isn't necessarily a good thing. The only thing that's actually proprietary these days is the Mezzanine spatial pointing wand. And the wand is, I should have brought one with me, but it's a wand, a magic wand that you use to point at objects on the screen, drag them around, resize them, juxtapose elements, basically reconfigure the room around you. The wand is properly the grandchild of the Minority Report gloves. So it's a way to directly access anything that you can see in the room without having to get up out of your chair, just by pointing at it. Of course, you can access Mezzanine not just using the wand, but through your laptop or a browser or a smartphone or a tablet. That's part of our message, that it's not just one thing in the future, it's everything. You already have your favorite applications, your favorite devices. bring those are extensions of your own brain, and now bring them into dialogue with each other in this big visual computing space.
Tell us how one of your construction customers connects 6 offices, shaved a 5-week planning process down to 5 days.
Well, Holder Construction is one of our favorite customers. They're a construction firm, a sort of niche firm. They do very particular, complicated, and impressive projects. And those projects are usually big enough that it requires participation from Holder teams and also client teams that may be spread over multiple cities or indeed, around the planet. And part of what gets in the way when people try to execute something like that is just getting together, getting your ideas out of your head into a space where I can see them, understand them, and not just me, but everyone else who's involved as well. And part of the trick is that everyone is an expert in her or his own domain. So seeing all that stuff at the same time is the best way to get people on the same page and the best way to allow the process to continue. If you send an email to me and we're separated by 3 time zones, I might well miss it, saying, the carpet is on fire, or the HVAC system doesn't fit in the elevator that we built for the construction, or whatever the problem du jour is. If I miss that because I'm on the East Coast and I've already gone home, then it's tomorrow morning before anything happens. Instead, we can get in the same room, even though it's actually 6 separate mezzanine rooms that are joined together, and we can just work through all of the problems. There's never that moment when you say, I'll get back to you. You don't ever need to get back to someone because it's happening right there, right then. Because the answer is either in your head or it's on your laptop or your device. And so you just take the answer and toss it up onto the screen. Or the work process that would lead to an immediate answer. And so for us, this is something they said on their own, the reduction of a 5-week process down to 5 hours is exactly the right thing. It was never supposed to be 5 weeks in the first place. It's just that people weren't really able to communicate, and not just with words, but with diagrams and project plans and everything that makes up the modern era.
So then more broadly, how is technology standing in the way of collaboration?
Well, I can't help seeing that question and its answer as a question really about user interface. With my own beef, as is probably well known to anyone who's wasted time reading anything I've written or with pixels that I appear on, knows that I feel like we haven't made progress on UI. We haven't made fundamental progress on UI in 35 years. It's been since 1984 when the Macintosh took the command line where you were typing stuff in and stuff came out in text form, and turned it into pictures, turned it into the desktop metaphor that we're still using today. And so that was good then. It's amazing that it still works today for everything we want to do. But the world is more complicated. The machines are faster. Everything about the world and its capabilities and what we want to do with technology has advanced, except for the language that we use to communicate with the machine. So we need to make some fundamental advances in user interface, I think, to get to the next level, that next plateau of what machines can really help us do. And despite all the AI in the world, despite all of everything else in the world, we're not going to get there if we can't say what we mean, if we don't have a way of speaking into and getting information back out of the machine that's as human and as kind of nuanced as we are as human beings and as presumably the masters of these machines.
So is there a role then for machine learning or artificial intelligence in user interfaces?
I think there absolutely is a role for AI machine learning. And thank you, by the way, for saying machine learning first and not necessarily AI, because it's an important distinction. I'm grateful for for the recognition there of that very important distinction. I think it's actually, I think it's the other way around. I think the really important contribution that's waiting to be made is UI around machine learning, artificial intelligence, whatever you want to call it. Because right now, those things are black boxes, and that's what gets us into trouble. Even if we don't have nefarious intents, and sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but even if we don't, we get into trouble whenever we can't understand what's going on. You and I can understand each other because we've got these fantastically expressive faces and a whole bunch of brain that's dedicated basically just to understanding faces. Like, I know that you're really irritated at me or bored out of your mind. Or really looking for another sip of coffee or whatever it is. just based on your face. You don't have to explain it. But if I didn't have that, if all we had was a typewriter and we passed messages back and forth, well, we all know this from email. Email is a great way to get in trouble because it doesn't convey emotion very well. And that's where we are with UI generally. And it's even worse when we're talking about AI, machine learning, and the rest of it, because no one even really understands at a low level how decisions are being made there. So I think the opportunity is to instrument AI, to give us a glimpse into how it's working, to basically put a face on it, to let us know that the machine learning algorithm isn't quite as sure about this. There's a look of, less than confidence on its little machine learning face. Whatever it is, so that we can guide the process, so that we can interpret the process. That would be huge, and it'll keep us safe in a way that I think is achievable and doesn't have to do with Skynet deciding to extinguish all of us, which is that's the usual fear that's articulated, and that's not the right one.
We interview a lot of people involved in smart cities for CBS Interactive, ZDNet, and Tech Republic. How does a better UI help make cities even smarter?
Well, again, I think that there are systems that are being born and being wired up right now. Some of those include IoT type technologies, Internet of Things, where actual components that make up cities, whether it's fire hydrants and traffic lights, or water systems or airflow in an individual building, the electricity, the power grid, the rest of it, are instrumented and can report back into kind of a central living database. And there are machine learning algorithms that can interpret those things, but what's not in the loop there sufficiently is human beings. Again, you can tell this is sort of a refrain I'm going to keep coming back to, but what we need is a UI that lets people understand all that stuff. And to understand it, you have to see it. And to see it, you have to see it at scale. So this is the place. I think city scale is a really interesting scale, because that's where we're going to have to stop pretending that something like a smartphone is enough. Smartphones are great, it's computation that we take with us, but it's just physically small, no fault of its own. That's why we can put it in a pocket or a pocketbook and take it along. But this is just not enough to see at one time. I can't see the entire city, and if I'm trying to unsnarl some traffic because the president's coming through town or whatever the case is, I just can't see enough here. And I certainly don't have enough space to implicate a bunch of colleagues who are going to help me work on the problem. So part of our take on UI at Oblong is to say, your UI might be small if your task is small, but you better have an answer for when the problem space is big, the solution space is big, the number of collaborators is greater than one, and you just need to see more stuff at one time. You better have a wall full of pixels if you're trying to work on something at city scale. So I think that's part of the answer. We could get much further without a lot of new inventions, say on the AI side, if we could just see enough.
Well, I'm excited about the work that you're doing at Oblong Industries, and I really appreciate your time, John. If somebody wants to connect with you, maybe they want to find out more about your work, or maybe, get involved with you in some way, how can they do that?
I think the best way would be to go to our website, simply oblong.com, or check us out on social media at oblong_inc and oblong_news. Capture a lot of what's going on day to day here, and I'm delighted to hear from anyone who's interested in talking more.
Thanks again. And I will be following you for sure. If you want to connect with me, or maybe find more of my interviews, you can do that right here on ZDNet or Tech Republic. Or maybe if you want to connect with me, you can go to my website, which is tonyahall.net. I have links to all my social channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. In fact, if you want to talk, find me on Twitter at @TonyaHallRadio. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching.